All right, everybody, welcome to the stream. This is As It Is Written, and my name is Ryan, and tonight we're going to be doing something a little bit different. We are going to be studying Nehemiah Chapter 9. So this is a chapter that I just recently went through in my daily Bible readings, and I'm going through the book of Nehemiah. What I do personally is I try to read a chapter a day in the Old Testament, and I try to read a chapter a day in the New Testament. That's not like a rule or anything that anyone has to do. That's just what I've felt like I should be doing in order to be studying properly. And I've been reading through Nehemiah, and kind of the background of Nehemiah is the Jewish people had been taken captive by the Babylonians, and King Artaxerxes gives Nehemiah the ability to go back to his homeland and to begin rebuilding Jerusalem. And so the this chapter 9 of Nehemiah, is the repentance of the people that have returned. So I'm going to read it for you, and then we'll go over and discuss a few of the points that I wanted to make. So Nehemiah chapter 9. Now on the 24th day of this month, the children of Israel were assembled with fasting, in sackcloth and with dust on their heads. Then those of Israelite lineage separated themselves from all foreigners, and they stood and confessed their sins and the iniquities of their fathers. And they stood up in their place and read from the book of the law of the Lord, their God, for 1/4 of the day, and for another fourth they confessed and worshipped with their God. Then Jeshua, Bani, Kadmiel, Shebaniah, Bunni, Sherebiah, Bani, and Chenani stood on the stairs of the Levites and cried out with a loud voice to the Lord their God. And the Levites, Jeshua, Kadmiel, Bani, Hashabaniah, Sherebiah, Hodijah, Shebaniah, and Pethahiah, said, "Stand up and bless the Lord your God forever and ever. Blessed be your glorious name, which is exalted above all blessing and praise. You alone are the Lord. You have made heaven, the heaven of heavens, with all their host, the earth and everything on it, the seas and all that is in them, and you preserve them all. The host of heaven worships you. You are the Lord God, who chose Abram, and brought him out of Ur of the Chaldeans, and gave him the name Abraham. You found his heart faithful before you, and made a covenant with him, to give the land of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Jebusites, and the Girgashites, to give it to his descendants. You have performed your words, for you are righteous. You saw the affliction of our fathers in Egypt, and heard their cry by the Red Sea. You showed signs and wonders against Pharaoh, against all his servants, and against all the people of his land. For you knew that they acted proudly against them. So you made a name for yourself, as it is this day. And you divided the sea before them, so that they went through the midst of the sea on the dry land. And their persecutors you threw into the deep, as a stone into the mighty waters. Moreover, you led them by day with a cloudy pillar, and by night with a pillar of fire, to give them light on the road which they should travel. You came down also on Mount Sinai, and spoke with them from heaven, and gave them just ordinances and true laws, good statutes and commandments. You made known to them your holy Sabbath, and commanded them precepts, statutes, and laws, by the hand of Moses your servant. You gave them bread from heaven for their hunger, and brought them water out of the rock for their thirst, and told them to go in to possess the land which you had sworn to give them. But they and our fathers acted proudly, hardened their necks, and did not heed your commandments. They refused to obey, and they were not mindful of your wonders that you did among them. But they hardened their necks, and in their rebellion they appointed a leader to return to their bondage. But you are God, ready to pardon, gracious and merciful, slow to anger, abundant in kindness, and did not forsake them, even when they made a molded calf for themselves, and said, "This is your God, that brought you up out of Egypt, and worked great provocations. Yet in your manifold mercies you did not forsake them in the wilderness. The pillar of the cloud did not depart from them by day, to lead them on the road, nor the pillar of fire by night, to show them light, and the way they should go. You also gave your good spirit to instruct them, and did not withhold your manna from their mouth. and gave them water for their thirst. 40 years you sustained them in the wilderness. They lacked nothing. Their clothes did not wear out, and their feet did not swell. Moreover, you gave them kingdoms and nations, and divided them into districts. So they took possession of the land of Sihon, the land of the king of Heshbon, and the land of Og, king of Bashan. You also multiplied their children as the stars of heaven, and brought them into the land, which you had told their fathers to go in and possess. So the people went in and possessed the land. You subdued before them the inhabitants of the land, the Canaanites, and gave them into their hands with their kings, and the people of the land, that they might do with them as they wished. And they took strong cities and a rich land, and possessed houses full of all goods, cisterns already dug, vineyards, olive groves, and fruit trees in abundance. So they ate and were filled and grew fat, and delighted themselves in your great goodness. Nevertheless, they were disobedient and rebelled against you, cast your law behind their backs, and killed your prophets who testified against them, to turn them to yourself. And they worked great provocations. Therefore you delivered them into the hand of their enemies, who oppressed them. And in the time of their trouble, when they cried to you, you heard from heaven, and according to your abundant mercies you gave them deliverers who saved them from the hand of their enemies. But after they had rest, they again did evil before you. Therefore you left them in the hand of their enemies, so that they had dominion over them. Yet when they returned and cried out to you, you heard from heaven, and many times you delivered them according to your mercies, and testified against them, that you might bring them back to your law. Yet they acted proudly, and did not heed your commandments, but sinned against your judgments, which if a man does, he shall live by them. And they shrugged their shoulders, stiffened their necks, and would not hear. Yet for many years you had patience with them, and testified against them by your Spirit and your prophets. Yet they would not listen. Therefore you gave them into the hand of the peoples of the lands. Nevertheless, in your great mercy, you did not utterly consume them nor forsake them. For you are God, gracious and merciful. Now therefore, our God, the great, the mighty, and awesome God, who keeps covenant and mercy, do not let all the trouble seem small before you that has come upon us, our kings and our princes, our priests and our prophets, our fathers, and on all your people, from the days of the kings of Assyria until this day. However, you are just in all that has befallen us, for you have dealt faithfully, but we have done wickedly. Neither our kings nor our princes, our priests nor our fathers have kept your law, nor heeded your commandments and your testimonies, with which you testified against them. For they have not served you in their kingdom, or in the many good things that you gave them, or in the large and rich land which you set before them, nor did they turn from their wicked works. Here we are, servants today, and the land that you gave to our fathers, to eat its fruit and its bounty. Here we are, servants in it, and it yields much increase to the kings you have set over us, because of our sins. Also they have dominion over our bodies and our cattle at their pleasure, and we are in great distress. And because of all this, we make a sure covenant and write it. Our leaders, our Levites, and our priests seal it. Amen. That is the word of the Lord. So that's Nehemiah chapter 9. And again, this is the people coming back to Jerusalem after they had been enslaved for I think it was 70 years. So they are coming back to the land. Nehemiah has secured the right to rebuild the city and the temple from King Artaxerxes. He's being there are people that are already in the land that are trying to stop him. There are pagans that are trying to stop him. And so he has fought off a lot of different problems. But in this chapter, they finally get around to dealing with their biggest problem, and it's the people and confessing their sins. So we see in this that God is mighty to save. He sees us even in our rebellion, and wants to have mercy on us once we repent of our evil works. That's what we see here in this chapter. So a couple of the things that I wrote down that I wanted to cover as I was reading it. So we have done wickedly as a nation. So verse 33, however, you are just in all that has befallen us, for you have dealt faithfully, but we have done wickedly. And so we see here in this that God deals faithfully with us even when we are wicked. And I would say, as a nation, this country has been incredibly wicked, especially over the last 60 years, but for quite a while. We've done very wickedly. We have not repented of our sins quite just yet, but I think that we are in that process. I think that with Roe v. Wade being overturned in the judicial system, that has ramifications for our culture as well as it does our law. And so I think that we are seeing a reawakening culturally of those ideas and those values that God has given to us. And so I hope that we repent like they did here in Nehemiah chapter 9. And then in verse 35, for they have not served you in their kingdom, or in the many good things that you gave them, or in the large and rich land which you set before them, nor did they turn from their wicked works. And so, again, as a nation, that to me, I see the United States right there. Not that this is talking about the United States; it's clearly talking about Israel. But I think that there are ways that we can take from this what we should be doing here in the United States. We haven't served you in our kingdom, or in the many good things that you have given us. We have some of the best things given to us that have ever been created, ever. We have the best technology. We have some of the most incredible legal systems in the world. At least we used to. Our freedoms are unparalleled, and God gave us all these good things. We have large and rich land, which He set before us. We can look at California here. We had the gold rush. It was a rich land in that respect. It's a rich land in oil and a host of other natural resources, and also just in natural beauty. We have one of the most beautiful countries. Our nature is still relatively preserved as far as our national parks and other areas that we've set aside to save and preserve for the next generation. We have some of the best national parks of any country in the world. And so, we've been given a large and a rich land. We produce more food than pretty much anybody else, at least per capita. And, what we've done with it are our wicked works. That's what's come about from it. Killing 60 million of our own people in the womb at that. So there's been a lot of wickedness that our country has done, and we need to repent. So I think I'm gonna go check this out. That there is a parallel to Romans 8. If I got the chapter right. Let's see. So, give me a second here. I'm gonna sort of flip through this. Maybe it's chapter 1. Let me check chapter 1. Yep, okay. It's Romans chapter 1. A little bit confused on the chapters there. So I'm going to read this whole chapter, and then we'll kind of compare and contrast that to Nehemiah 9. Paul, a bond servant of Jesus Christ, called to be an apostle, separated to the gospel of God, which he promised before through his prophets in the Holy Scriptures, concerning his Son, Jesus Christ our Lord, who was born of the seed of David according to the flesh, and declared to be the Son of God, with power according to the Spirit of holiness, by the resurrection from the dead. Through him we have received grace and apostleship for obedience to the faith among all nations for his name, among whom you also are the called of Jesus Christ. To all who are in Rome, beloved of God, called to be saints, grace to you and peace from God our Father and the Lord Jesus Christ. First, I thank my God through Jesus Christ for you all, that your faith is spoken of throughout the whole world. For God is my witness, whom I serve with my spirit in the gospel of his Son, that without ceasing I make mention of you always in my prayers, making request, if by some means, not at last, I may find a way in the will of God to come to you. For I long to see you, that I may impart to you some spiritual gift, so that you may be established, that is, that I may be encouraged together with you by the mutual faith both of you and me. Now I do not want you to be unaware, brethren, that I often planned to come to you, but was hindered until now, that I might have some fruit among you also, just as among the other Gentiles. I am a debtor both to Greeks and to barbarians, both to wise and to unwise. So as much as is in me, I am ready to preach the gospel to you who are in Rome also. For I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it is the power of God to salvation, for everyone who believes, for the Jew first, and also for the Greek. For in it the righteousness of God is revealed from faith to faith, as it is written, the just shall live by faith. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and righteousness of men, who suppress the truth in unrighteousness, because what may be known of God is manifest in them, for God has shown it to them. For since the creation of the world his invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse, because although they knew God, they did not glorify him as God, nor were thankful, but became futile in their thoughts, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Professing to be wise, they became fools, and changed the glory of the incorruptible God into an image made like corruptible man, and birds and four-footed animals and creeping things. Therefore God also gave them up to uncleanness in the lusts of their hearts, to dishonor their bodies among themselves, who exchanged the truth of God for the lie, and worshipped and served the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. For this reason God gave them up to vile passions, for even their women exchanged the natural use for what is against nature. Likewise also the men, leaving the natural use of the woman, burned in their lust for one another, men with men committing what is shameful, and receiving in themselves the penalty of their error which was due. And even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a debased mind to do those things which are not fitting, being filled with all unrighteousness, sexual immorality, wickedness, covetousness, maliciousness, full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, evil-mindedness. They are whisperers, backbiters, haters of God, violent, proud, boasters, inventors of evil things, disobedient to parents, undiscerning, untrustworthy, unloving, unforgiving, unmerciful, who knowing the righteous judgment of God, that those who practice such things are deserving of death, not only do the same, but also approve of those who practice them. So, the first part is a wonderful retelling of the gospel in Paul's words. Some people jokingly like to call this the gospel according to Paul, the book of Romans, I should say. So, there is a wonderful teaching here in the first part, but what I was remembering as I was reading Nehemiah Chapter 9 is this second part, where it starts talking about the wrath of God is revealed against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness. And I think that that verse, more than a lot of others, describes where we are as a nation today. So we are a nation that has suppressed the truth in unrighteousness. And then what happens here in verse 24, so that was verse 18. So down here in verse 24, we see a therefore. So therefore, because of all this stuff up here, therefore God also gave them up to uncleanness in the lusts of their hearts, to dishonor their bodies among themselves, who exchanged the truth of God for the lie, and worshipped and served the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. That is an absolute, that is a description of exactly what we have done in this country in the last 30, 40 years. Pretty much in my lifetime, but it was starting even before then. Okay, we have been given up to uncleanness because of the lusts of their hearts, to dishonor their bodies among themselves. That couldn't be a better description. We exchanged the truth of God for the lie, and worshipped and served the creature, that which is created, rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. We have absolutely exchanged our worship and our love for God for a worship of created things. We've lied to ourselves and said that these things aren't created, that they are random, and that they have been randomly assembled over billions of years, and that there's no point to anything. We've lied to ourselves about that. And that causes a bunch of problems. And we see what those problems are: vile passions, women sleeping with women, men sleeping with men. We've seen that. This is Pride Month. We're proud of it now. It used to be that it was a sin and people were ashamed of it. And now today it's a prideful event. We have a whole month. We have an entire month where people are told and applauded for having pride in their homosexuality. And we've expanded on it. We've came up with whole new classifications that don't even make sense. The LGBTQIAAP plus. I don't even know what the acronym is anymore. It's insane. There are new letters added every single day, and they're just vile passions. That's what God's given us up to. God gave them up to vile passions. And there's a lot of people that agree with those ways of living that would say that that's a good thing. Great, God gave us up to it. That's awesome. We're having a really great time. But unfortunately, we don't understand the destructive nature that those acts have on our own bodies and on our own souls. So I think that there is a big opportunity for our country to begin going down the road that the Jewish nation did in chapter 9 of Nehemiah. That's what I pray for. I just pray that God works in our nation, that he awakens us, that he uses this broadcast, but of course all the other much more important broadcasts that are happening from Mike Winger and John MacArthur and everyone else that puts their church teachings and preaching up on the internet. I pray that God uses that to reawaken this country, that more people start going back to church and hearing good, sound Christian doctrines, not the pulp that we've been getting. We need to be reading from the Word. We need to be reading whole chapters, not just little snippets, little sound bites that get pulled out to make a point. Preachers need to go verse by verse to some extent. I think that's something that we've missed out on since with the new styles of teaching that there are. So that's what I wanted to share as far as that is concerned. I'm incredibly overjoyed to hear that Roe v. Wade has been overturned and that the ability for states to outlaw abortion is now back on the table. So I'm going to continue by watching something from a channel that's actually going to be deleted pretty soon. I hope to be able to find him wherever he lands. He's had some issues with YouTube pulling down his videos and just being a general problem. So we're going to watch something that he has been that he made a few weeks ago called Aborting the Image of God. Here we go.
I was almost aborted. My mom got pregnant with me when she was 15. My dad was 17 at the time, and he was a drug dealer. So having an abortion, getting rid of this old lump of cells, would have been a pretty convenient move for both of them. My mom got pregnant again a year or two after she had me, and she had an abortion then. So they took out one of my siblings. My mom and her sister combined got pregnant 5 times when they were in their teens. They had 3 abortions, and me and my cousin Brandy. 40% survival rate for the original 5. My mom had another abortion when I was a teenager, another sibling gone, and then she had my 2 brothers. I'm glad my mom didn't abort me because I had some pretty dope stuff to do, as you're about to see in this very video. Now, the abortion debate usually centers around issues like when human personhood begins and what rights a woman has over what goes on in her own body. But as with most moral debates, I think about this in terms of imaging God and degrading the image of God. Let's read a quick passage from the opening chapter of the Bible, Genesis 1, verses 26 through 28. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him, male and female he created them. And God blessed them. And God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over every living thing that moves on the earth." Now, in my video, Norm Macdonald, The Image of God, we discussed what it means to be created in the image of God. The Bible never gives a clear explanation of what the phrase image of God means, but when we examine the main passage in Genesis 1, we see that it has something to do with three relationships: man's relationship with God, man's relationship with other human beings, and man's relationship with nature. Human beings, both male and female, can image God in these relationships. In another video, Mark Zuckerberg, The Image of God, we saw another important component of the doctrine drawn from the larger context of Genesis 1. The passage about man being created in God's image is immediately preceded by God creating the universe. God creates, God creates, God creates, God creates, God creates, God creates, and then God creates man in his image after his likeness. One possible implication of the passage in context is that man is supposed to image God in creating, like when we make epic videos. But now we're going to look at another way human beings image God, namely in producing children. In Genesis chapter 5, we read, "This is the book of the generations of Adam. When God created man, he made him in the likeness of God. Male and female he created them, and he blessed them and named them man when they were created. When Adam had lived 130 years, he fathered a son in his own likeness, after his image, and named him Seth." God created man in his likeness. Then Adam fathered a son in his own likeness, after his image. I've seen a lot of people claim that when the Bible says Adam fathered a son in his own likeness, it means that Adam's offspring were no longer the image of God because of sin and the fall. So Adam and Eve were created in the image of God, but they sinned, so their children were no longer the image of God.
Wouldn't the image of Adam, by definition, have to bear some resemblance to the image of God if Adam was made in the image of God?
But we can't agree with an interpretation that contradicts what other passages about the image of God say, and Genesis 9:6 and James 3:9 say that people long after sin and the fall are still created in the image and likeness of God. At most, you could say that since Adam fathers a son in his own likeness, he fathers a son who no longer images God properly, even though he's still the image of God. You could also say that since Adam's descendants are the image of God and the image of Adam, we're constantly confronted with a choice. The choice of whether to image God in our relationships with others or to image Adam in those relationships. When we image God, we somehow reflect the eternal nature of God. When we image Adam, we reflect a kind of selfishness that seeks to replace God with something else. But let's think about how human beings image God in producing children. In Genesis 1:26, God says, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness." Let us make man in our image, after our likeness. When you first read this, you might think that God is talking to the angels or something, but man isn't created in the image of angels. This is the triune God. Man is created in the image of the triune God. Based on this verse, some have claimed that God is telling us that each human being is a kind of trinity composed of body, soul, and spirit. But there's nothing in this passage about body, soul, and spirit. There is, however, a unity and a diversity in this passage that has to do with human beings. Where's the unity? God creates man. Where's the diversity? Male and female. Watch what happens when we go back to Genesis 5. A son is generated within Eve's body. Eve, with some help from Adam, generates a son. Remember, Eve is the image and likeness of God. Eve, who is the image of God, generates a son, who is the image of God, and thus Eve and her son image the eternal generation of God the Son within the nature of the Trinity. Keep in mind, a human being generating another human being is very, very different from eternal generation. All of the ways we image God are finite, temporal reflections of the infinite, eternal God. But Eve generating a son does image the eternal generation of the divine Son. Look more closely at this passage, and you'll see something else. Male and female were both named man. The Hebrew word for man here is Adam. So, Adam is a generic name for humanity, similar to our word mankind. In fact, many translations translate man here as mankind. But there's also a specific person who's named Adam. The word Adam can refer to humanity in general, but it can also refer to a specific man. So, Adam is Adam. Adam, the person, is Adam, the kind of thing human beings are. But Eve is Adam as well. Eve, the person, is Adam, the kind of thing human beings are. Seth is also Adam. Seth, the person, is Adam, the kind of thing human beings are. Adam, the person, is not Eve, the person. Eve, the person, is not Seth, the person. Seth, the person, is not Adam, the person. But Adam is Adam, Eve is Adam, and Seth is Adam. Look familiar? It should. It looks very similar to a conceptual diagram of the Trinity. To be clear, once again, the triune God is very, very different from human beings and from human relationships. The triune God and the relationships within the triune God are infinite and eternal. Human beings are finite, temporal images of the infinite, eternal, divine nature.
I would argue slightly that we are not finite. We had a beginning, we were created, but we were created as infinite beings that will have an afterlife, will live forever with God, or we will live forever in torment in hell. That's often forgotten in our culture today, but it is the case nonetheless. If you are not saved, you will be sent to hell to live there for eternity. Unfortunately, that's not something I'm happy about. I don't relish in that fact, but it is important to mention. And so we actually are infinite, just not in the same way that God is. Our life will be eternal.
Persons of the Trinity share the same divine essence. Human persons function as separate beings. But a man and a woman producing a child, a man who's Adam, and a woman who's Adam, producing a child who's Adam, a man who's the image of God, and a woman who's the image of God, producing a child who's the image of God, does reflect something about the eternal nature of God. So, human beings are created in the image of God, and we image God in a lot of different ways. We image God in our ever-increasing dominion over the natural world. We image God in our relationships with other people. We image God in our love for the persons of the Trinity. We image God when we create things. We also image God when we produce children. When a woman, who's the image of God, becomes pregnant, another image of God is actualized within her. Before, there was only the potential to produce another image of God, the potential to image God by producing the image of God. But at conception, the image of God is actualized, meaning that unless something stops it, the offspring generated within her will continue to develop the capacities to image God. In generating an offspring, the woman images God by producing someone who is the image of God. In generating an offspring, the woman and her child image the eternal generation of the Son. in sharing the same human nature with the man and their offspring while remaining distinct persons. The woman and the man and their offspring image the triune nature of their Creator, in whose image they were created. But the man and the woman also image our original parents. And so when the woman becomes pregnant, when the image of God is actualized within her, either the woman alone or the man and the woman together have a choice. The choice to either reflect the eternal divine nature or
Yep. All right. And those are the options. If you don't support human life and protect it at every stage, including its single cell, all the way down to a single cell, what happens other than that is death, unfortunately. It's the death of a human life. It's evil and it's wrong, and there's been 60 million of them that have occurred. The Bible talks about the land crying out. Our land is crying out for justice.
Do you understand what it means to be created in the image of God? I'm convinced that somewhere around 90% of the world's problems would be solved if people would get their minds around this one idea. And yet, even the people who believe that we're created in the image of God rarely have any clue what that means. If you'd like to finally get it, you're about to get some help from an unlikely source, a cancer-riddled comic genius. Watch this till the end, and you will see the world a bit differently. Back in September, comedian Norm Macdonald lost his battle with cancer. Oh wait, I forgot. I'm not supposed to say that.
See, in the old days, a man could just get sick and die, Now, they have to wage a battle. And the reason I don't like it is because in the old days, they go, hey, that old man died. Now, they go, hey, he lost his battle. That's no way to end your life, What a loser that guy was. Last thing he did was lose.
So what should we say when someone dies of cancer?
And I'm pretty sure, I'm not a doctor, but I'm pretty sure, if you die, the cancer also dies at exactly the same time. So that, to me, is not a loss, that's a draw. That's a,
Comedian Norm Macdonald waged an epic 9-year battle with cancer and fought cancer to a draw. That does sound better. But I'll tell you, the more I hear about cancer, the more I don't care for it. I've been watching Norm Macdonald for years, and when he died, I ended up watching a bunch of clips of him on YouTube. Of course, when you start watching videos on a certain topic on YouTube, what does YouTube do? It recommends a bunch of other videos on the same topic. So for weeks, YouTube was giving me more and more Norm Macdonald videos to watch. Eventually, I watched some videos, usually audio only from podcasts, where Norm talked seriously about God, Jesus, the Bible, Christianity, Judaism, the soul, things like that. And it's interesting to hear him talk seriously because usually if the topic of religion would come up during an interview, he'd go into comedian mode. When he was being serious, sometimes he would say that he's a Christian, other times it sounded like he was closer to Judaism. Still other times he would claim to be some sort of generic theist. Part of the reason for the shifting positions was his methodology. Norm was a fan of intuition. Certain things seemed true to him based on a feeling, an instinct, a hunch, some sense of the way the world is that wasn't based on reasoning. Then he would reason based on his intuitions, and he would lean towards whatever position fit his intuitions best. Let's go through an example of his reasoning process. Norm said he always had an intuition that a personal God exists.
I just have an intuition that there's a God. When I say God, I don't mean like a force or something. I mean an actual personage. I just have this intuition that there is one. Like I've always had it.
But he wasn't impressed with the information you might find in gospel tracts.
Everything I've read from religious tracts or stuff all seem like insane to me. So I haven't really found one, but although I will say this: of all the religions, I like Judaism and I like Christianity.
Now that's strange. When someone gave him a pitch for Judaism or Christianity in a religious tract, it sounded insane to him. And yet, he said he liked Judaism and Christianity. What was going on here? Well, Norm had an intuition about man, and Judaism and Christianity fit his intuition better than other ideologies did. His intuition was that human beings are a kind of paradox, and that somehow we're simultaneously something spectacular and divine and something horrible and depraved. But it's easy to emphasize either the spectacular and divine aspect or the horrible and depraved aspect.
All right, Missionary Gamer, we'll go check out 1 Corinthians 1:18. Let me switch over to Bible reading mode. First. All right, for the message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved, it is the power of God. Oh, thank you. You put it in there. Awesome. Yeah, thank you, Missionary Gamer. I appreciate you coming on in here. I saw you on, what channel was that? I think it was Mike Winger's or somebody's channel. And, oh, no, I think it was Doreen Virtue. Yeah. And I'm very inspired by what you've done. So I appreciate you coming on here and sharing. Is chapter verse like a is that like a plug-in or something that puts the text up there for you? Oh, okay. I'll have to check into all that. I actually don't know very much about Twitch
There are some people
specifically.
that believe that like man is divine, like kind of a hippie idea that we are all like beautiful creatures. So, anyways, I can't believe that because I know my own heart, and I know that's not true.
Why are there people who think of human beings as divine, sometimes even as gods and goddesses temporarily trapped in human bodies? Well, there's obviously a radical difference between human beings and other animals. We have a constantly expanding control over nature. We have an aesthetic sense that gives rise to art and music. We use moral concepts to judge our actions. We use logic and evidence to evaluate arguments. We understand mathematics and philosophy and history and science. We explore the world. We explore the universe. We explore the cells in our body. We're drawn to something spiritual. We're so obviously different from anything else in nature that we seem divine by comparison.
You're breathtaking. You're all breathtaking.
There's only one problem. Most of us know ourselves well enough to know that we really, really suck. So, enough of all this unleash your inner goddess nonsense. We're terrible. And this leads to a completely different understanding of human nature.
And then like other people believe like we're wretched, like the cynics, you know, or the atheists or whatever would believe that we're all just wretched, like nothingness, you know, we're just animals, just creatures. So I can't believe that. That doesn't make any sense. You know, that we're just beasts.
Why are there people who think of human beings as mere animals, mere beasts? Apart from obvious biological similarities, the simple fact is that human beings often act like beasts. Even when we use the abilities that set us apart from other animals, we end up using them to satisfy the same drives that we share with mere animals. In other words, we use our capacity for creativity and innovation to produce the internet, the greatest information sharing revolution in history. And then we use the internet to watch porn. But it gets worse, because the abilities that set us apart from other animals allow us to behave far, far worse than the animals. Since Norm Macdonald was a huge fan of Russian authors, here's a passage from Dostoevsky's Brothers Karamazov that Norm was quite familiar with. By the way, in Moscow not long ago, a Bulgarian told me, Ivan went on, ignoring Alyosha's remark, of the atrocities committed all over his country by Turks and Circassians, who, fearing a general uprising of the Slav population, set villages afire, rape women and children, nail their prisoners to fences by the ears, and leave them in that state until morning, when they hang them, and who commit other atrocities that are difficult even to imagine. People often describe such human cruelty as bestial, but that's, of course, unfair to animals, for no beast could ever be as cruel as man. I mean, as refinedly and artistically cruel. The tiger simply gnaws and tears his victim to pieces because that's all he knows. It would never occur to a tiger to nail people to fences by their ears, even if he were able to do it. Those Turks, by the way, seem to derive a voluptuous pleasure from torturing children. They do everything from cutting unborn babies out of their mothers' wombs with their daggers to tossing infants into the air and catching them on the points of their bayonets as the mothers watch. It's doing this in front of the mothers that particularly arouses their senses. But of the things the Bulgarian told me, the following scene particularly caught my attention. Imagine a baby in the arms of his trembling mother, with Turks all around them. The Turks are having a little game. They laugh and tickle the baby to make it laugh too. Finally, they succeed, and the baby begins to laugh. Then one of the Turks points his pistol at the baby, holding it 4 inches from the child's face. The little boy chuckles delightedly and tries to catch the shiny pistol in his tiny hands. Suddenly, the artist presses the trigger and fires it into the baby's face, splitting his little head in half. Pure art, isn't it? Incidentally, I understand that Turks are very fond of sweet things. Why are you telling me all this, Ivan? Alyosha asked. I think that if the devil doesn't exist and is therefore man's creation, man has made him in his own image, just as he has created God in that case. Yes, I just quoted a passage from one of Norm Macdonald's favorite authors, which talks about Satan being created in man's image to help make a point in a video about man being created in the image of God. That just happened. So, in one sense, man seems amazing and divine when we compare him with the rest of the natural world. And in another sense, man seems depraved and demonic when we compare him with the rest of the natural world. Man isn't one or the other, he's both simultaneously. The correct doctrine of man, then, needs to account for both facts about man.
So I will say that Christianity has this interesting compromise where we're both divine and wretched. The other two are both seem equally untrue. One, that we're all divine and interconnected with nature, just seems like nonsense to me. The other, that we're beasts of the field, seems like nonsense to me. So I kind of like that Christian idea.
We're both divine and wretched. Here, Norm is referring to the doctrine in both Judaism and Christianity that human beings, both men and women, have been created in the image of God, but that human beings have been corrupted by sin. Let's have a quick crash course on this topic, and we'll see what Norm is getting at. According to Genesis 1, 26 to 28, Genesis 5, 1 to 3, Genesis 9, 6, and James 3, 9, human beings, both male and female, were created in the image of God. But what does that mean? It means a lot of things, but to get the most basic meaning, think about the role of images in the ancient world. A king who ruled over an empire would have images of himself placed in cities across the empire as a reminder of his authority and dominion. When you saw the image of the king, it reminded you of the king. If you were to defile the image of the king, that would be considered an attack on the king. In the Bible, God says that human beings were created in his image. So human beings are supposed to be some kind of reflection of God. Now, all of creation is a kind of reflection of God's nature and attributes, but only human beings are said to be created in God's image. So there's something special about the way human beings reflect or image God. There are two basic ways that human beings are the image of God. One is structural and the other is functional. This will be easier to understand with an example. Think of an airplane. An airplane has a function, flying. When an airplane is functioning properly, it flies. But an airplane can only function properly if it has a certain structure. It needs the necessary parts arranged in the right way. So an airplane has a structure and a function. Human beings also have a structure and a function. Our most important function is to image God. We're supposed to make the invisible God visible. And there are several ways that we can do this. God has authority and dominion over everything, but he gives human beings authority and dominion over the earth. We reflect God with our dominion over the earth. God is eternally a social being. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit have an eternal loving relationship. When God creates man in his image, he creates man as a social being. The Bible says male and female, he created them. We reflect God in the loving relationships we have with other people who are created in God's image. The most important relationship we can have is a loving relationship with our Creator. Our love for God is a reflection of God's love for us. When our lives are properly oriented towards our Creator, we become like a mirror that's positioned so that when people look at us, they see a reflection of God. So we image God in our relationship with God, in our relationship with other human beings, and in our relationship with the natural world. That's our proper function. But notice, we can only function in this way because we have a certain structure. Earlier, we briefly discussed the abilities and capacities that set us apart from other animals, our reasoning ability, our moral faculties, our aesthetic sense, and so on. These abilities and capacities image God because they're limited, finite, temporal versions of God's attributes. So, just as an airplane performs its proper function when it flies, we perform our proper function when we have the right relationship with God, with our neighbor, and with nature. And just as an airplane can only function properly because it has a certain structure, we can only function properly because we have a certain structure, namely the various abilities and capacities given to us by God so that we can be his image. Now, that makes us sound like some amazing creatures. We can see why some people are convinced that we're divine. Why are we simultaneously wretched, as Norm says? Well, when human beings fall into sin and rebellion, we take the abilities and capacities that God gave us so that we can be his image, and we use them to insult God and to degrade his image, other human beings, and ourselves. That's what makes us so incredibly horrible. We take something that was given to us for a supreme good and we use it for evil. It's like someone gives us money to open a homeless shelter, but we use it to start a human trafficking ring. That's why we're simultaneously divine and wretched. But are we doomed to stay this way? Are we stuck like this? Or did the God who created us in his image also make a way to restore the proper functioning of his image? Take it, Norm.
And then there's this middleman, you see. That's the Savior, that through him we can become divine, but we're born wretched. And so it's a very fascinating idea. I kind of like that one because it sort of makes sense.
There you have it. The Gospel according to Norm Macdonald.
Kind of like that one because it sort of makes sense.
I like that one too, Norm. So, God creates us with certain abilities and capacities, a certain structure, so that we can image God properly, so that we can make the invisible God visible on earth. But we use those abilities and capacities for everything but imaging God properly. We use those abilities and capacities to try to keep God invisible on earth. But Christ, the perfect image of God, the one who truly made God visible on earth, restores our relationship with God. And by looking to Christ and imitating Christ, we grow in our ability to image God until we're no longer the image of God only in structure, but also in function. This has been affecting my view of the world since the day I became a Christian. To see how, just think about comedians as an example. Comedians can only do comedy because they have abilities given to them by God. But they can use those abilities for anything they want. They can use those abilities for outright blasphemy. The stand-up of Sam Kinison is a good example here. Tons of mockery of Jesus and the Bible. But in using the abilities given to them by God, in using their intellect and wit and artistic sensibility, even in using their ability to speak, which is also given by God, they're still imaging God, even if they're mocking God or degrading his image. When we use the abilities that make us like God in limited, finite, temporal ways, we image God. We may image God in a defective way, but we still image God. Absorb this idea and you start to see God everywhere. Not because everything is God, that would be pantheism, but because everything reflects God in some way. Nothing as much as man does, and no man as much as Christ does. You can watch speeches by Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris, and all you'll be thinking is, you guys are glorifying God in ways you don't even realize. You can watch an episode of South Park or a Quentin Tarantino movie, and every time you see the work of a creative genius, you understand that the genius himself is the work of an even greater genius. You can go on Twitter and see the endless bickering as people try to demonstrate their worth to their group by attacking the right people, and all you see is God. All people image God. They just image him in defective ways. But once you understand the ways in which they're defective, you just see the image. Of course, it's much better when someone is imaging God properly, even if it's only for a few minutes of a podcast. And to hear clips of Norm Macdonald arguing for the existence of the soul or responding to the problem of evil, even though his arguments were pretty sloppy by the standards of a philosopher, to hear Norm fumbling his way towards the Almighty because of the inclination that God gave him to do that, it makes us think that Norm, at least at times, was the image of God in a better sense than most. I'd like to image God in some videos. How are you going to image God today?
Amen. Well, those are a couple wonderful videos from Acts17Apologetics. I'm very thankful that he produces that content. My understanding is that he's having some issues with YouTube. He's had them take down his content and generally harass him. So he is going to delete his account next month. So he's asked all of us to watch and react to his content to kind of give it a second life. And so I'm going to be doing that over the next few days that I'm streaming. I'm not sure exactly when the next time I'll be streaming is, but we will see what happens with that account. So that's what we have for tonight. I'm very thankful that I got to stream. I know that I haven't been streaming quite as frequently as I used to. Life just gets in the way, and I'm trying to make it more of a priority. So I'm working on that, and I hope that you all have a good evening. I'll lead us out with a prayer. Lord God, I come before you because you are the creator of the universe, but more importantly, God, you are the author of my salvation. You planned it out from the beginning, and you knew that you would be saving me. And I praise you and I thank you for doing all of the things that you have done in order to make that happen, especially sending your Son, Jesus Christ, to die on the cross, and most importantly, to be resurrected so that I can know that I am saved from my sins. God, I praise you and I thank you for that. You are the one who was and is to come, and you are just so much greater than I am that I can't even possibly fathom it. I ask you to use these videos to bless the people that watch them, to help them to come to a greater knowledge and understanding of you. God, I pray that you just continue to work in my own personal life to reveal yourself to me and to show me and direct me onto the path that you want for my life, God. I pray that you just work with everyone who sees this, that you bring them closer to you, and that you help them in their lives to show them how powerful and mighty you are to save. I pray these things in your Son's holy and precious name, Jesus Christ. Amen. All right. Good night, everybody. Hope you have a wonderful weekend, and happy 4th of July.